June 12, 1989. In a quiet corner of Stuttgart, Germany, the curator of the Württemberg Museum twisted an unmarked key into a steel door no visitor had ever seen. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a room that history had tried to bury. Crates stacked floor to ceiling. No labels, just yellowing paper tags marked Reichsarchiv. Nicht öffnen. Do not open. He pulled the tarp from the first crate. Beneath it, a rusting metal cylinder, still stenciled with faded Gothic letters. Project Natter, an experimental rocket interceptor, half completed before the Third Reich fell. Inside, blueprints for an onboard fuel system that could have turned the Me-163 Comet, already the first rocket-powered fighter, into a suicide missile. The curator froze. He'd read about these projects in Allied intelligence briefings, dismissed as post-war exaggeration. But this was real. He moved to the next crate. This time, a glass canister the size of a man's arm. Inside, a pale liquid with a greenish shimmer. The tag, Seestoff. The hypergolic fuel that ignited the Me-163 instantly upon contact with T-Stoff, turning even a drop into a blinding explosion. Many Luftwaffe ground crews never lived to see takeoff. One mistake, and the aircraft became a torch. He inhaled, careful not to breathe too close. Even after 40 years, traces of vapor shimmered in the air. Then he saw something stranger still. A sealed box stamps on Derdrit Abteilung 12. Special equipment, Department 12, a division so classified even the SS archives barely mentioned it. He opened it. Inside lay the blueprints for what the Germans had called Die Glocke, the bell, a bell-shaped metal object with magnetic containment rings, and notes written in Reichsdeutsch shorthand. According to rumors gathered by Allied intelligence, the bell was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a field generator. Some said anti-gravity. Others, radiation research. But the diagrams were unmistakable. Power coils, plasma containment, and a note from a Dr. Walter Gerlach. The curator realized the magnitude of what he'd found. These weren't trophies. They were secrets, the kind never meant to see light again. He heard footsteps behind him. Two men in dark suits entered the room. No museum badges. No smiles. Closed the crates. One said in accented German, "They're being transferred." "By whose authority?" the curator asked. The man handed him a document, NATO Historical Technology Custody Directive 1961. When the curator looked up, the crates were already being sealed again. He never saw them again. But rumors spread. Across Europe and America, whispers of hidden collections surfaced. Forgotten bunkers, sealed depots, classified exhibits. Places where the most dangerous relics of World War II were locked away from the public eye, because some of those weapons, they said, still worked. March 4th, 1997. A storm rolled across the Scottish Highlands, rattling the iron gates of a former RAF installation near Lossiemouth. To passing hikers, it looked abandoned, barbed wire sagging, watchtowers empty. But 100 feet underground, fluorescent lights flickered on over something that shouldn't exist. Rows of metallic pods lined the bunker walls, each sealed in vacuum containment. Labels read confidential, Class V recovery. Inside were fragments of machines that defied the conventional timeline of 1940s technology. A young Ministry of Defense archivist, Emily Reeves, had been granted temporary clearance to catalog aerospace anomalies transferred from Germany in the late 1940s. She expected jet parts, maybe radar components. What she found were engine cores wrapped in alloy no British lab had been able to reproduce. Stamped on the casing, Messerschmitt AG Augsburg, 1945. She brushed away the dust, revealing coils arranged in a pattern eerily similar to ion propulsion systems. Technology NASA wouldn't publicly test for another 3 decades. Nearby, a note tucked in an old file read, Recovered near Breslau. Function unknown. Emits high-frequency radiation when energized. Emily felt the weight of the silence, the hum of air filtration, the smell of oil and ozone. It was like the air itself remembered fear. As she continued deeper, she found a locked vault door marked Obersalzberg Artifacts, high sensitivity. Behind it, a glass cylinder sat under dim light, a strange metallic sphere suspended in liquid nitrogen. Attached was a handwritten tag, Gerat 1045, Vortex Stabilizer. Her supervisor stopped her from approaching. "You don't open that," he said flatly. It was never supposed to exist. When she asked why it was stored here, in a NATO facility, not a museum, he hesitated. Because, he said, some of these designs weren't purely German. They were found. The word hung in the air like radiation. He handed her a declassified memo from Operation Paperclip, dated in 1946. It listed names: von Braun, Dornberger, Kammler, men whose rocket dreams built both the V-2 and later America's space age. But beside their names were references to projects transferred to foreign custody, not recommended for replication. In the corner of the page, underlined twice, was a chilling phrase: Category Z, non-conventional energy weaponry. Emily looked around the vault again, her pulse quickening. These were not just relics of war. They were pieces of an arms race that never made it into textbooks. As thunder cracked above the Scottish hills, the fluorescent lights flickered once more. For a split second, the sphere inside the liquid nitrogen chamber pulsed with a faint blue glow. Emily took a step back and realized this museum wasn't preserving history. It was containing it. November 1945. The war was over, but the hunt for knowledge had just begun. Across the ruins of Europe, Allied intelligence teams raced to capture not gold or art, but minds. In a shattered laboratory outside Prague, U.S. Army Major Robert Staver stepped over shattered glass and crumpled blueprints. The walls were scorched, the ceiling half collapsed. The locals said the Germans had burned everything before retreating. But beneath the rubble, his team uncovered something far stranger: a set of lead-line canisters labeled only with Greek letters. Inside, fragment of what looked like miniature turbines, embedded with fine copper windings. A scrawled notebook nearby read in German: "Rotation beyond 60,000 revolutions per minute induces temporal instability." The signature at the bottom froze Staver's blood. Dr. Hans Kammler. Kammler, the SS general behind the V-2 rocket program, had disappeared months earlier, his fate never confirmed. Some claimed he died in Berlin. Others whispered that he'd escaped with something far more dangerous than rockets. The Americans classified the find immediately. Those canisters were shipped west, first to France, then to a remote U.S. base in New Mexico. There, they joined dozens of other scientific recoveries under the secret heading Operation Lusty, the collection of Nazi aviation technology too advanced to destroy. But not all of it made it across the Atlantic. In Poland, Soviet troops seized entire trainloads of research equipment, centrifuges, vacuum chambers, and hundreds of classified binders. Among them, one folder was marked in red pencil: Project Thor. Witnesses later described it as a theoretical orbital weapon, a device capable of striking the Earth with tungsten rods from orbit. It sounded impossible, science fiction, yet the file was marked as feasible within 20 years. When Stalin scientists opened the crates, they found something that didn't fit any known wartime project: a magnetic containment ring with traces of radiation and strange runic markings on its housing. Within days, the research site outside Smolensk reported multiple fatalities from unknown causes. The project was sealed, every surviving document stamped top secret, Special Bureau 7. And just like that, those names, Kammler, Gerlach, Schumann, vanished from history, their patents erased, their discoveries sealed in vaults from Washington to Moscow. But one rumor refused to die. In 1960, an East German defector claimed he had worked in a museum under Gorlitz, cataloging non-approved technologies for the Stasi. He said he saw a small bell-shaped machine spinning in a magnetic cage, glowing faintly violet. When asked what it was for, his superior replied, "It's not a weapon. It's a warning." No one believed him. But when Western historians tried to locate that facility decades later, they found the entire site had been sealed by concrete and water. No records, no blueprints, only the faint echo of a program history never meant to remember. And yet, some of those artifacts began resurfacing, not in battlefields, but in private collections and hidden vaults beneath museums, where only a few dare to look too closely. April 17, 2011, Bavaria, Germany. The rain beat down on the roof of a small rural museum outside Augsburg, a museum that, officially, wasn't on any map. The sign read Technisches Depot Sud. A local legend said it stored experimental aircraft parts recovered after the war. What it actually held had never been shown to the public. That night, Dr. Klaus Mertens, a retired aerospace engineer and lifelong aviation historian, had been granted rare access. He'd spent decades studying declassified Luftwaffe blueprints, convinced that somewhere pieces of Germany's final wartime projects still survived. He hadn't expected this. The first chamber resembled a hangar, lined with tarps draped over skeletal airframes. A guide flicked on the lights. Beneath the covers were angular metal shapes, nothing like conventional aircraft. No propellers, no jet intakes, only smooth surfaces and odd curvature, as if they were designed to bend air itself. One was labeled Horton 9V3, the prototype stealth jet that inspired the American Bee 2 decades later. But beside it stood something even stranger, a metallic disc 12 feet across. Its surface scorched as though it had endured extreme heat. Koblenz 1945, the guide said quietly. Recovered by American forces. We were told to catalog it, not explain it. Klaus leaned closer. The edges of the disc bore inscriptions, a mixture of serial numbers and coded initials. One marking caught his eye. Gerat 347 Kamler ABT. Kamler. Again, he ran his hand across the metal. It wasn't steel. It was lighter, warmer, an alloy he didn't recognize. The guide's voice dropped to a whisper. Officially, this museum doesn't exist, he said. It's operated by a private trust under NATO supervision. We hold anything deemed historically destabilizing. As they walked deeper, the air grew colder. Another room contained sealed glass cases, small unmarked artifacts, a cylindrical device with copper rings, a piece of fused sand that once might have been concrete, and a notebook written in a spidery, fading hand. On the cover, Kronos Versuch 2, Time Experiment 2. Inside, equations blurred into sketches of a rotating bell and magnetic field lines drawn around it. The final entry read, Containment unstable. Personnel advised to keep distance. Exposure leads to neurological distortion. Klaus turned the page, but the rest had been torn out. He felt an odd vibration in the air, as if the walls themselves were humming, almost imperceptibly. What's below this floor? He asked. The guide hesitated. Storage, he said. Then, after a pause, the kind we don't talk about. Later that night, while leaving, Klaus glanced back at the museum. For just a moment, he saw a faint blue glow beneath the concrete foundation, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The next morning, he tried to contact the curator, only to find the museum's phone line disconnected, its website removed. By week's end, Technisches Depot Sud had vanished from the public registry entirely. Months later, a new construction site appeared in its place. Official reason: soil contamination cleanup. But those who'd been inside swore the ground itself seemed to resist being disturbed, as if something beneath refused to be unearthed again. And across Europe, similar whispers emerged. Sealed halls in Poland, restricted wings in Italy, shuttered depots in France, all filled with artifacts that history was too afraid to display. One phrase appeared again and again in classified correspondence: Category Z, active containment. What were these forbidden weapons? And why, after 80 years, were some of them still humming? September 2nd, 2019. A maintenance worker at the Polish Aviation Museum in Krakow arrived for his night shift to find the basement power meters flickering. He thought it was a fuse. But when he reached the underground archive, the air was alive with static. The taste of ozone sharp in his throat. Down there, behind a locked gate marked "Do Not Enter," post-war archives, sat several crated relics from secret German research sites evacuated through Silesia in 1945. They were part of a classified Cold War exchange program. Nobody had opened them in decades. Until tonight, he noticed a single crate had shifted off its pallet. The lid partially split. A thin blue shimmer leaked through the crack, dancing across the concrete like liquid light. He crouched, flashlight trembling. Inside was a spherical core surrounded by coiled copper bands, a smaller cousin of Die Glocke. A faint hum resonated through the floor. Then a flash, so brief it could have been imagination, of the machine moving, almost breathing. The worker fled upstairs. Security found him minutes later, shaken and incoherent, repeating one phrase over and over: "It wasn't dead." When technicians arrived, the core was inert again. Radiation scanners detected nothing unusual. The official report listed it as a malfunctioning capacitor. But that night, cameras throughout the museum recorded electromagnetic interference. Every image warped by a circular distortion that lasted for 7 minutes. That file was never released. Weeks later, whispers reached the Ministry of Culture. Investigators arrived quietly, sealing the basement and transferring the crates to an undisclosed NATO facility. The director was ordered not to speak of it, but word still leaked through restoration circles that the forbidden collection was being relocated for containment recalibration. Containment, a word that didn't belong in museum vocabulary. July 2020. In an airbase archive near Huntsville, Alabama, the same city that once housed Von Braun's rocket team, a historian reviewing newly declassified microfilm found something buried in a 1952 Air Material Command memo. A photo, grainy and water-stained, showing 3 U.S. engineers standing beside an object that looked eerily familiar. The same bell-shaped machine. On the back was scrawled, "Recovered from Facility 22, power source intermittent. Maintain negative temperature." The memo carried one final note, handwritten in the margin by an officer whose name was redacted. "If this field reactivates, contain, don't replicate." Some machines remember. That phrase began circulating through small corners of the historical community, among archivists, ex-engineers, and curators who'd handled the unexplainable. They started calling them the forbidden weapons, not because of their danger, but because no one could explain what they were. Weapons that seemed to defy time. Machines that hummed long after their creators were gone. In 2022, a journalist claimed to have traced one of the missing artifacts to a subterranean complex in Norway, formerly used for heavy water research. She never published her findings. Her notes ended with a single entry: "The vibration is constant now. It's like the walls are waiting." And so the myth continues. From Stuttgart to Smolensk, Krakow to Huntsville, whisper among the few who've seen what lies in the shadows of history's museums. Because some relics of World War II weren't destroyed. They were buried. And some of them might still be waking up